Hi, everybody. We're so glad you're able to join us today. You're here, as you hopefully know by this point, for our webinar, AI Literacy to AI Coherence, How Educators Can Integrate AI Responsibly in Teaching and Learning. We hope by the end of today's session, you'll know some of the core principles for teaching students to use AI both ethically and effectively, as well as understanding some system-level strategies to align AI tools with curriculum, pedagogy, and policy. We also hope you'll be able to identify some of the key risks in AI adoption, as well as some potential strategies to mitigate them. Throughout the presentation, we hope you'll gain the ability to apply reflective questions and practical tools to guide AI integrations in their own context. So throughout the webinar, feel free to engage with one another through the chat. You can also type questions in the question and answer box. Our moderator will be moderating those and providing them to the speakers during the correct time. We really appreciate you all for being here today to talk to us about AI. We hope you're as excited as we are. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. We have today with us Dr. Douglas Fisher from San Diego State University, Dr. Nancy Fry from San Diego State University, my colleague, Dr. Lorena Aceves from Child Trends, and me, Claire Kelly. We think educational AI should be ethical, reflective, and effective. And we hope by the end of today's presentation, you'll fully understand why anyone implementing AI in an educational setting needs to choose tools and design processes that highlight all three of these elements together. It's not enough to simply be ethical or reflective or effective. All three ingredients are necessary for successful AI implementation. So first, I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Fisher, who'll be talking a little bit more about why AI in education needs to consider both ethics and coherence.
Right. And hello, everyone. Welcome. So as I was thinking about our time together, I was reflecting back on some of my career and some of the conversations that my colleague Nancy and I have had over the years. In retrospect, looking back, hindsight, perfect vision. In hindsight, we probably missed the boat when it came to social media. We allowed passively social media to occur with young people, not really teaching them about it, teaching for it, developing skills and resilience and ethical use of social media. And I would argue today we are paying the price because schools have the potential to help students learn things like ethics, responsibility, how to be efficient and effective. And we can't go back and change the social media mistake. We missed it collectively. We let it happen. And now all the reports are about the damage that is being done to young people with social media. So I'm thinking about that. And the reason Nancy and I took on AI early on, like the early days, saying like, wow, this is fun to play with. Oh, wait a minute. We're playing with it. That means our students in our high school are playing with it. And we started saying, let's not miss the boat. Let's not allow this to go on. And then a year or 5 or 10 from now say, I wish we would have. I wish we would have taught students ethical and responsible use of new technology. Nancy, I was thinking back to earlier times when like there was a computer lab and the only time kids ever got to touch a computer was to go to the computer lab. Now computers are everywhere. And then internet came on and then we all got worried that they were going to cheat on the internet. And I'm old enough to remember we were going to Netscape everything and cheat it all out. And we're having the same conversation today that they're going to use AI to cheat, to plagiarize. I had a teacher tell me 9 years into the profession last week that he needed a new classroom management routine because students were passing handwritten notes.
Wow.
Because of the parameters, like we're not using our computers now because we don't want to go on AI. So they were writing notes like old school. So I think we have an opportunity to teach young people how to harness this amazing tool we have.
Well,
How are
and
you
I think,
thinking about
yeah, I
that?
think Doug, you're making a good point too, because the fact of the matter is that students are using AI, but perhaps if they're not getting guidance about how it is to be able to use it ethically, to use it responsibly, and to be able to use it in ways that are effective to support their own learning, then we're going to leave it to, the 12-year-olds to decide what it is that means. There's a great opportunity here for us as educators to be able to really take the lead on this in teaching toward the use of AI. There's a great quote that has been used many, many times before, that our responsibility as educators is not to prepare our students for our past, but for their future. And AI, in all of its many forms, is something that is only going to grow in terms of influence in any one of a number of fields. We have an opportunity to be able to do that, but we need some coherent approaches in order to be able to do that. It can't just be the wild, wild west.
I think that's one element that really raises the stakes for AI training. AI is not something that's confined to schools or even higher education. This is going to be central to people's employment and is already present in nearly all fields. So when we think about teaching students to use AI effectively, we're not just teaching them for the 2, 3, 4 years we have them in school, we're teaching them for the future that they're moving into.
Absolutely. Show me a position, a job that pays any living wage that isn't impacted by AI. My sister is an oncology nurse. She's been using AI for a really long time. That is part of the process of her work. My family does a lot of work in construction. They're now using AI to have AI analyze best placements for things like where to put the electric outlets in this building. I mean, it's touching every industry. It's a global technology that will touch all of our lives. Unfortunately, some young people are not being prepared to use it in efficient ways. What we hear, so San Diego State did what the largest study of students ever conducted. And one of the major findings in that study was confusion. What is allowed, what is not allowed. And they feel mistrusted or distrusted because they are using technology resources. No one has told them yes, no, or otherwise. And then after the fact, they're punished for it. So we have to get better.
I'm teaching an AI ethics class at the moment, and I was shocked by the number of university students who admitted to me when we were working together on the class's AI policy that this was the first time they'd been involved in a discussion of AI policy. And this is something that probably should be happening across the board and certainly should be happening by the time students are in universities where we know they're using AI liberally.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Day
And
goes
it,
by, sorry, Nancy. I don't think a day goes by without me using AI. I don't think a day goes by.
right. And I would offer that in many cases, AI is something that is in the back of the house.
Hmm.
Anybody use their GPS system
Yeah.
to get to work this morning? You used AI. You may not have recognized that that's what you were using. In other words, I think Doug and Claire, your points are it is present in so many aspects of our lives. Are we going to just take that back seat approach and say, well, we'll just sort of let it happen? We made that mistake with social media, as you pointed out, Doug. Or are we going to be able to teach toward how to use it ethically, how to use it responsibly, and how to use it effectively so that we can actually advance student learning?
Nancy, I was just thinking about last week, you found a coin on the ground. I was with you. You took out your phone and you asked ChatGPT, what coin is this? How much is it worth? Where it's from?
Exactly.
It's just ubiquitous now.
Exactly. And so, how do we make that happen within school systems? I know already in the chat, Jorge noted that we need professional educators and administrators to embrace what those various tools are and what the aims of those tools are. Jorge, very well said as far as that goes. One of the things that we know is that simply having a ban on
Huh.
AI only drives its use underground. Having a ban and saying, nope, nobody's allowed to use AI isn't going to advance what student skills need to be, or how we create at the systems level. How do we create coherent systems that help to support AI usage with the adults in a school organization, with the students in a school organization, always with the idea in mind, how do we advance learning?
I really think Nancy brings up the sort of main point here. How do we think about this at a systems level? Um, a lot of the work Child Trends has been doing has been focused on how do we take a system side view. And our answer to that, like many implementation researchers, is to develop frameworks to think about how we integrate AI at the systems level and to sort of organize our thinking and plan both implementation and evaluation of this kind of project. Um, There are a couple of frameworks that we wanted to talk about today, sort of moving from idea to implementation. We first often think about our framework for coherent AI use, which is focused on how AI implementations can be coherent on both a technological, curricular, pedagogical, and implementation level. And then once you've established what you should be doing, the AI class framework helps guide how you should be doing that. So how can schools and districts support safe and productive use of AI in both teaching and learning? And that breaks that down into a couple of ordered steps that make it easier to think about at a systems level. And of course, any discussion about AI in education would be remiss without discussing the risks of AI as well. So one of the things that we found most useful in AI implementation is a structured framework for thinking about AI risk. So to start from the beginning, the framework for coherent AI use breaks AI coherency into 4 levels. After the discussion we've just had, I hope you're all convinced that coherent AI is important. This breaks it down into what that actually means. At the very base of the pyramid, any AI implementation needs to be technologically coherent. That is, it needs to integrate well in existing learning management systems. It needs to function correctly, and it needs to be controlled by the school or district that's implementing it. Technological coherence is not the sexy part of AI implementation, but it's the underpinning that allows everything else to work. As everyone who's been in the education space or as a parent or student in the last 20 years knows, technology implementations come and go, and there's a lot of fatigue about education technology. So building a future AI project that will be successful really focuses on removing the barriers to technological coherence. Of course, having a system that just works isn't sufficient. It's necessary, but in addition, educational AI systems should be coherent with curriculum. Um, as anyone who's followed the debates about Common Core math over the past 20 years probably knows, there are infinitely many ways to teach any skill. And AI tools will be both most acceptable and most effective if they're well aligned with your own curricular choices as well. And in addition to following the curriculum of the school or district, they should also follow pedagogical approaches that are controlled by school or district leaders. So rather than going to Gemini and typing in what's the answer to my math homework, you would hope that a well-designed AI system in education would follow strategies like scaffolding students or providing easier examples or pointing people in the right direction rather than writing their essays for them. And layering on that pedagogical coherence on top of curricular and technological coherence is where we see these systems begin to shine. And of course, at the very top of the pyramid is implementation coherence. Whatever system or strategy you design on paper is only as good as its implementation in practice. And that really underpins the entire project from pre-testing through the rollout, through measuring outcomes and changing your project as you gain those outcomes along the way. One recent excellent example of coherent AI is Google's Learn Your Way tool, to which I have no affiliation. I wish. This very interesting tool that's recently come out uses generative AI to create textbook customizations, and it's a really good example of how an educational AI tool can focus very heavily on the technological and curricular levels of coherence. Technological coherence in this example really just means this just works, as some of the positive reviews suggest. You can plug in a textbook in a PDF form and it just works with no more effort on your end. And then the results that you get are consistent with the curriculum. So it's taking the material from the textbook, the methods of teaching things, the content, and then personalizing it to alter the reading level, to create customizations. And this is a really good example of how these two pieces work together. So if you were to think about implementing something like this in your school, this is where you then layer on the pedagogical coherence and the implementation coherence to take this from idea to reality. We hope that thinking about this framework brings more questions than it does answers at this point, because at this point in an AI implementation, we should be really full of questions. When we think of projects under a coherent AI framework, some of the questions that this drives us to ask are things like, have the teachers received the appropriate training they need on how to integrate the tool into their existing work? And as Doug and Nancy already mentioned, are there clear norms for when and how students should be using AI? We also want to think about fundamental features like, is the tool accessible to all learners? And do students and families fully understand the educational purpose and potential benefits of the tool? And this framework can help you sort of organize these thoughts at the beginning of the implementation of a project. So now moving along in time, if you'd like to think about that way, after you've understood what AI coherence is, the AI class framework is designed to think about how you go about implementing a project like this. As with any educational AI implementation, we see safety as sort of the underlying thread that runs through an entire implementation. Protecting teacher and student data is essential, and placing guardrails around AI use such that the responses that they give to students are appropriate for their age and context. We then envision AI projects in basically four main steps, starting with awareness. So at the awareness stage, everyone within your organization should have the opportunity to participate in trainings and workshops. Everybody should be familiar with the ethical implications of AI in education, and have the chance to explore various AI tools and their potential uses. Beyond the awareness stage, we move deeper into an AI implementation. At this stage, what we're most interested in is knowledge. That is, knowledge that teachers are contributing in terms of pedagogical and content knowledge, as well as technological knowledge, including elements of how AI works. While not every project needs to be a machine learning masterclass, although I would enjoy that myself, everyone who's using AI tools should have a rudimentary, grade level appropriate understanding of what they're doing and what the way AI works means for how we should evaluate and use its knowledge. Then as we move deeper into the project, we focus more on collaboration, so identifying ongoing professional opportunities, making selections from the tools that we learned about in phase one, and implementing these practices, as well as developing metrics to evaluate the success of our project. If everything's gone well up to this point, the project culminates in alignment, where we engage in meaningful reflection and are sort of continuing learners, updating our project as we learn more about what works and doesn't work, and developing a clear implementation path towards the future. So as a quick example of how this could work, if you were imagining that you're adopting an AI tutoring program in your school, the AI class framework would help you think through the steps you need to be successful. So first, it would urge you to think about safety. How are we protecting student data? If this is to be linked to a learning management system or other grade-bearing system, how are we protecting that data? What happens if students enter personal information? What guardrails are there to prevent accidental disclosure? And what guardrails are there to make sure that the AI is interacting with students in an appropriate manner? We would then move through the 4 steps, starting with knowledge. So what do we know about what's already out there? What tools are available off the shelf? What things might need to be custom developed? Into awareness. What do teachers and tutors already know? How can they help us? How can we build the skills and AI literacies necessary to make this an effective project? And then the project will be moved into production through collaboration and into the alignment phase at the end. And thinking about these things in this way gives you a sort of 30,000-foot view that allows these projects to be successful at all levels. When we're thinking about a project developed under the AI class framework, this brings up, again, more questions and answers. We should be asking things like, what AI tools are already in practice? Who within your school or district or organization has already received AI trainings? Were those effective? Who were the early adopters? What does a successful implementation of an AI initiative look like? And what data privacy and security practices are already in place? Are these AI ready, or do we need work to get our security system AI ready? Finally, I'm sure everyone's already tired of hearing about AI risk at this point, but we would be remiss not to mention the considerations for AI risk. So building on the National Institute of Standards and Technology's AI risk framework, Trends has developed this AI risk mitigation framework specifically for education, which focuses on basically 8 main risks and potential methods for mitigating them. So to be an effective educational AI tool, something must be valid, safe, fair, accountable, sustainable, private, community engaged, and implemented with awareness of the risk of inaction. And this is one of the risks I want to highlight because it's somewhat different in sort of tone and valence than the other risks. As I think Doug and Nancy both very eloquently emphasized, AI is already here. There's no putting the horse back in the barn. And if we don't do anything, AI will still be used by students. It just won't be used in the way we necessarily used in the way we want them to use it. A couple of the risks that I think are sort of top of mind in educational AI are fairness, accountability, and sustainability. So within any AI implementation, we should be very aware of who is this being tested on and who does this work for. We should also always be able to accountably explain why a decision has been made to a student, as well as how their data is being used by AI. One concern I hear frequently mentioned by students is the feeling of being watched or surveilled. And I think having accountability and explainability can really support students in that strange landscape. And then I think I already prefaced with our discussion of technological coherence, sustainability of educational technology is an ongoing challenge. So thinking about how a project will be sustained after the grant ends or after the educational technology company changes hands is really essential, and is essential to making lasting change rather than temporary sort of fluctuations. I hope thinking about the AI risk framework inspires you to ask questions yourself. Some example questions that are important include what stakeholders might need to be consulted, what are the risks of not doing anything, and what metrics or measures can we identify that would help quantify these potential risks and help direct us towards how to mitigate them. I'm happy to pass it back to Dr. Fry, who's going to tell us a little bit more about teaching students to use AI ethically and responsibly.
Thank you so much, Claire. And you've given us a lot to be able to think about and Doug and I have been doing a lot of work around what AI looks like, how its use can be, and so on within schools, within classrooms as well. And so I'd like to invite Doug as well into this conversation. And I'll kind of start out with laying out a bit of a frame for how it is that we think about AI usage and as a three-part structure. The first part of that is making sure that we're teaching about AI. And this applies to the adults as well as to the students. So certainly what adults benefit from, and Claire, you referenced this a little while ago as well, is around knowledge and awareness, the under the hood kinds of experiences. Teachers need to know where this information comes from, what are some of the limitations, how is that information generated, what are large language models useful for, as well as what they're not useful for. There are limitations with any kind of a tool. And if you think about the tools that you have in your toolkit at home, there are lots of tools that are in there, and any one of those tools can be used incorrectly and badly if it is not being used to be able to solve the problem you're trying to solve. So it's really important for educators, first of all, to have that knowledge and awareness and those opportunities for them to be able to experiment, try things on, because we can't expect that that teachers are suddenly going to be able to utilize this in their classroom when they don't have a good sense of where this is coming from, what they're worried about, and so on. And so I think that teaching about AI is an important aspect of this. For those of you that are professional developers, you are site leaders, district leaders, and so on, that's an important first step in this. Let's teach educators about what's going on under the hood. Doug, I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
What I like your under the hood, I like how you make these analogies and similes and metaphors and things like that. But yeah, I was thinking about that, and someone will argue often, well, I don't know how my fuel injector works. I don't know how, but you know how the windshield wipers get turned on. You know how to turn your signals on. So, I mean, I don't think we have to get so deeply into the mechanics, and you did not imply that. I'm not saying that, but an understanding of what's happening here. Like when I explain to people, like these are data that have existed in the past, words that humans interact with, and thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs up, thumbs down. I mean, like, there's a process. Someone told me that it's getting smarter. And I'm like, well, you're personifying this. And so let's talk about what you mean when you say it is getting smarter. Let's just process that. And so I think understanding how some basic things about data science, how it works, where it's getting its sources from, what's the training corpus, I think those are important parts of understanding AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think those are those first steps. Are we making sure that educators have a sense of what this is, where this comes from, and what it looks like potentially, depending on who are the students that you're serving. For instance, for primary educators, for those that are working at the preschool or at the TK level, as we say in California, we need to contextualize this as well. What does this look like in a primary classroom? That's going to be very different from what this looks like in a high school classroom, for instance. And so that's the first part of that, teaching about AI. But a second part of that is how do we teach for AI? So in other words, what's that bridge between, okay, as an adult, I know some things about it, but how do I begin to put this into practice? And so what Doug and I have done in particular is to really look at what are the skills that students need in order to be able to use AI in ways that are ethical and responsible and effective. And some of those skills that they need are skills that we already know about as educators. And I'll take two examples of that around data literacy and around information literacy. These things predate the existence of AI. These are things that we have been teaching about for a very long time. How do you source information, for instance, when we're looking at information literacy? How do you source what that is? That existed before AI came along, and now we have some additional considerations for that. Understanding data literacy. Where do data come from? How is it that data represent particular ideas or misrepresent ideas? Again, we've been teaching about that for a long time. How do you verify information? These are all important skills that are necessary for students. And there are some skills that are newer. On the scene, newer with the arrival of AI. And prompt engineering, I think, is an example of that as well. How do you craft prompts such that it yields the information that you are looking for? We've got lots of students and quite frankly, lots of adults who are more familiar with how it is that you search in a search engine, but when you try to apply those same kinds of techniques in AI, it's not going to yield for you what it is that you want. And so teaching students about how it is that you engage with prompt engineering so that you get the kind of information that you need is essential. And a third skill that I'll talk about is around dialogue. Dialogue, super important when it comes to how it is that we engage with AI. You don't just ask it a question and take the very first thing that you get. You've got to keep the human in the loop for
Hmm.
all of that. And so, how do we engage in dialogue back and forth so that we can refine what it is that we're seeking? Now, I'll go back to a primary example. What primary teachers teach about is around dialogue. That's exactly what it is that they teach about. How do we communicate with our classmates? How do we communicate with other people? And then taking that extension and saying and modeling for students, here's how we use some of those same dialogue skills in order to be able to dialogue with the chatbot becomes a way to be able to apprentice very young children into those skills that they will need. And Doug, again, I'm wondering about any comments that you might have about teaching for AI.
And I appreciate that the process we went through. So to highlight that, we went through a process of reading what we could find around the research on skills. What are the skills that are needed? And as you noted, some of them are recycled and revising, and some of them are new. And I feel like we jumped into like, let's use AI in our classrooms versus what are the skills necessary that we need to develop in kind of a runway. And we've articulated there are things K2 students can be learning, those skills. There are 3, 5, middle school, high school. Um, and to ensure that we're developing those skills, those habits and dispositions, those ways of thinking about it. And I think those are important things to think through as we design the experiences for students. They don't have to be logged into an AI system to learn the skills about AI. There's a lot of skills that take a lot of practice, and then they apply them in their interactions with their chatbots. One of the findings from the first large study of students was that the number of smart devices you have, highly correlates with your use of and support of AI. How much you support AI being used and how much you actually use it. And the authors of this study argued that the number of smart devices is a proxy of wealth. how much disposable income you have. A tablet, a laptop, a smartwatch, a phone, those kinds of things. And they noted that people who had one smart device were less likely to actually use AI. And that is why you're starting to see some push around making AI available. For example, at our university, you know this, Nancy, every student can have an account for AI because we don't want to have some people paying the premium and getting great quality and some people not. And so there is a access issue that we had to deal with. And providing that access doesn't mean that everyone had the skills to know how to use it. So access is part of this, but I think when we teach those skills, we don't give those skills to just some of our students. We don't say, we're going to work on AI skills because you've already mastered this part of the class and I don't know what else to do with you. So the do now, must do, may do. We don't move the AI just to the may do. We make sure that all of our students are developing these skills.
So in
I think
other
that
words,
really,
oh, sorry, please.
oh no, go ahead.
I was just going to amplify what it was that Doug had to say too. How do we as educators make sure that we don't make the same mistake that we made before with a digital divide? How is it that we make sure that all students have access to those kinds of supports?
Yeah.
Claire,
And
what
I
were
think
you?
that's just, I was just going to say, I think that that's especially true for younger students. So once people reach the sort of 13 to 15 age, many kids have their own devices. When you're looking at younger age ranges, the dependency on the parents' technology and the parents' technology literacy is a lot stronger. And that can really exacerbate those digital divides when some people have access to parents who are experts and some people who have access to maybe no technology at all.
Mhm. Exactly. And as Doug was talking about earlier, as we analyzed those skills that students need, and many of them, by the way, are critical thinking skills. That's
Mm.
exactly what it is that we're doing. Again, we know about this as educators. These are not brand new ideas. But one of the things that we also then worked toward is in developing some skills progressions by grade band. So what's happening with the youngest of students up to second grade? What might this particular skill look like in those primary classrooms? What does this look like in grades 3 through 5, in grades 6 through 8, and in grades 9 through 12? So really kind of beginning to develop a scope and sequence for what those skills look like as students progress through the schooling system. In addition, what we also looked at as well was how do we leverage all of the things that we know about how very important it is to make the kinds of accommodations and supports that are necessary, for example, for multilingual learners. What does this mean? What does this skill look like for multilingual learners, and making suggestions around that? For advanced learners, for learners who are emergent readers, for instance, how do we make sure that we are utilizing the kinds of accommodations that are so important? Because we need to be able to make those customizations for our students using AI in the same way that we make those customizations when we're teaching about history or mathematics and so on.
Do you want to say anything about the third part about quests?
I did, yes. I did. So the third part of that, so that three-part structure that I talked about, first of all, teaching about AI and teaching for AI, and the third one is teaching with AI. So in other words, what does this look like in classrooms? And one of the places that we came back around to was quests. And what are particular things that you want to be able to partner with AI in order to be able to pose different kinds of questions. Now, as Claire alluded to earlier as well, we have to think differently about the tasks that we assign as well. If we're still assigning tasks that are pretty much go find information and put it into a paper, you're going to get pretty much what you expect. There's going to be a lot of plagiarism that's going on. But how can we turn these into quests of one kind or another? And so, for instance, teaching students the language around what's an anchor quest. All right. We've been learning about this particular concept. Now let's think through this new concept that we're going to be learning about. And as a quest, we want to be able to pose to the chatbot, how does this set of concepts help to inform what our new learning is going to be about? In other words, being able to build those bridges for that. Or a compare quest. Can we analyze the similarities and the differences between two phenomenon? And that's an important critical thinking skill that students need. I'll take on a different one and kind of build that out with a few more examples. And that is in particular using a critique quest, asking the chatbot to assist, give some input, and for you to be able to consider as a thought partner, evaluating the strengths and the weaknesses of an idea or an argument or a model, and so on. And so one example. Many classrooms use a project-based learning or problem-based learning kind of approach to be able to organize some of the curriculum that we use. And so students in those situations are often tasked with being able to develop a solution to a problem or to be able to develop a new model that might be responsive to a particular problem that exists in the community. Well, any good engineer knows that you need to be able to trial that out. You need to be able to get some feedback. Hey, this is an idea I have, but tell me where you see some of the gaps that are happening. That's a quest, that's a critique quest where you are asking the chatbot, here's some things that I've been developing as a possible solution for this particular problem. Please take a look at that and analyze that and tell me where are you seeing some of the gaps that are happening. In other words, to be able to spark up some of that thinking. Now, I would like to note that that kind of a quest in the past has often been done individually by a teacher, one student or one group at a time. This is a way for the teacher to be able to have the chatbot do some of the legwork to test that out so that the teacher can then respond more fully to the merits of a particular idea, as well as some of the possible shortcomings, or have you thought about this?
Mhm.
And so a critique quest at the elementary level, for instance, might be being a design detective, right? So students are critiquing posters that they have developed using a particular rubric. And the prompt is, here's my friend's poster, and upload what that picture is. Help me check, is the title easy to see? Are the images helping the message? In other words, I'm getting ready as a student to be able to give my peers some feedback. I want to be able to leverage some of the things that the chat bot can do in order to be able to support that. At the secondary example, analyzing a pitch, and we've been seeing this in the business class that is here at the school where Doug and I are, the high school where Doug and I are, where student entrepreneurs are developing a pitch for a new business idea, and they're using the critique quest in order to be able to run their pitch through and to be able to say, um, uh, here's a rubric for what my teacher says. I want you to check on how logical and how persuasive my pitch is. Where could it be stronger? And to be able to get some feedback in that way. Moving students from just finding information about the War of 1812 and plugging it into an essay, and instead really thinking about how it is that we use our critical thinking skills as quests to be able to engage with the chatbot can be a real game changer.
I think brings us to our next quest as presenters, which is to hear a little bit more from you. So I'm pleased to pass it over to Lorena, who will be facilitating our questions and discussions. Lorena, take the floor.
Yeah, thank you everyone for your patience. If we have not responded to your questions, we wanted to allow it in the Q&A so you can get a more deeper response. If some of our presenters answer some of the questions, I'm assuming you, because it was a quick, easy response that they could give you. So the first question that we have for you all is around how are we meaningfully distinguishing between different types of AI? AI is often used as a marketing term and shallows the conversations of the different types of algorithmic tools currently being adopted. So
I
I
love
think
this
we have
question.
some ideas, and then we can pass it over to our other panelists.
Absolutely. So I think this is a really good question that has two main dimensions. The first dimension is how do you split marketing hype from reality? And the truth is, there's a lot of products out there that claim to be using AI that really at best are doing statistics, right? And probabilistic predictions. When it comes to making that the distinction between marketing hype and, really AI. In general, the consensus definition of AI is models that allow computers to do tasks that would previously needed to have been done by humans, which is about as broad as it sounds. But largely, we can think of this as places where AI goes beyond producing one deterministic response and is flexible to input data. Within this bucket, it's helpful to think of it in two main categories. One being generative AI, that is AI that produces or understands language and images. Think things like ChatGPT or Gemini, which can be distinguished from what some people call predictive AI. So these are models like a bank developing a risk score based on your data when you apply for a mortgage, or a school developing a risk score for which students might drop out of introductory computer science. That predictive bucket is different in the way it works and different in the way people receive it than the generative AI bucket. Doug, do you see it differently?
I agree. Analytic AI, generative AI, building there, there's invisible AI, and sometimes like we don't even know it's technically happening. So we're talking mostly in our work in our school here in San Diego about generative AI. We're not doing a lot of work with analytic AI yet.
I do think that there's a lot of instances of analytic AI running that people don't know
Right.
they exist. And this is one of the sort of challenges in the transparency aspect of the risk framework is that people are being affected by AI predictive scores or AI stratifications that they may not know about.
Right. Right.
All right, we can move to our next question. So we have multiple people in the Q&A really interested about the environmental impacts of AI as
Mhm.
part of the processes that you all talked about. Nancy, sounds like you were excited to answer or start answering this question.
Yeah, and this is a part of those ethical considerations. And in fact, I was just responding to one of the participants that had raised that question. And at the school where Doug and I are in chemistry, as a matter of fact, this quarter, what they're talking about are what are the environmental impacts around AI data centers, and how is it that affects public health and so on. Where are those AI data centers being located? What kinds of communities are they being located in? What kinds of communities are they not being located in? Which is the U.S. history aspect of that. And then what are those environmental impacts around, for example, water usage, carbon emissions, and those sorts of things. And I don't see those environmental impacts as being separate from what it is that we are teaching students, but rather that within our curriculum, there are opportunities to be able to invite that in for that conversation.
I think this also is a feature that can be really engaged with through the pedagogical lens as well. That if we think about at a systems level, if we design pedagogy that makes limited use of AI, but also engages other avenues or more in-person learning, that mitigates the impact when you compare it to, say, adopting a curriculum that's entirely AI driven. So sort of figuring out a way to balance and a way to blend what's good about both instructional modes to some extent mitigates those risks. Although, given what we know about the proportion of US energy consumption that is being taken by AI and data centers, this is a huge issue that's going to come up not just for education, but across industry where AI use is rife.
Yep.
All right, another question, and I think this is on the forefront of a lot of folks, especially with students. How do we make sure a child's relationship with AI doesn't border on therapist or patient? In other words, how do we avoid unhealthy bonds with AI?
One of the things is to teach the students about AI.
Mhm.
This is not alive. This is not a thinking sentient being. And I think we personify it way too much. And we need to teach our students that what it is. We've all seen the scary movies out there around AI and personifying and robots becoming friends and then taking over. We've all seen them. We understand this is a real risk out there of young minds being shaped and thinking differently about these computers and machines. And I think not teaching them is putting them at risk because our brains attach to these things when they act like that. I mean, I know that there's a a system that you can subscribe to, I guess I'd call a system, that will make you an imaginary friend, a digital friend. And you can tell it what kind of friend you want, romantic, friendly, whatever. And you can interact. These are adults who, and this one of the studies was adults are leaving their spouses because they are in love with this bot that they've created. And so this is a challenge for us as a society to separate this out. Nancy, you were going to add to that?
Well, I'm just kind of circling back around to a point that you made early on as well, and that is that when social media came onto the scene, we sat on the sidelines and we didn't teach students about how it is that you ethically use that. What are some of the risks that are involved with that? And so here we are, 15 years later, and we are reaping some of the difficulties around that. This is our chance to be able to be much more proactive, much more responsive around that. And I totally agree. Teaching students, and by the way, teaching adults about AI and what its limitations are and what it is not is essential for being able to use it as a tool and not as a weapon or a source of self-destruction.
Yep.
Great. Another great question we have from the audience is, can you talk about the equity and cultural considerations and how to ensure these aspects are included in AI use?
I think I addressed a little bit of this around resources and are we making tools available to students without having added fees for that? I also talked about some of the learning that students need to do, not just some kids getting the skills for AI, but all students getting the skills for AI. And we also have to recognize There's bias in the training data that is used in most of these systems, and therefore they produce biased information. There was the study on images, I'm sure Nancy will tell you in just a second, but students have to be taught. This is bias. This is not, this is a stereotype. This is so they have to learn how to analyze. One of the skills is analyzing output. How are you thinking about what your system gave you? Nancy, you want to talk about the image study?
Yeah, so there was a fascinating image study that was done, and what the researchers did is that they would put various kinds of requests into chatbots, and they would do it 100 times with different chatbots in order to be able to do so. So I'll give an example. Show me an image of Indonesian food. That's one example. They're also, by the way, with humans as well. And what they found were that the images often amplified already existing stereotypes. For example, in the request about Indonesian food, nearly all of 100 of those showed food that was on a banana leaf. Now, if you've traveled in Indonesia, you know that, yeah, that might be something that's encountered, but it's not something that's encountered widely. Other examples, show me a picture of an Indian man. And again, overwhelmingly, it was an older man with a beard and a mustache and a turban. Again, if you've traveled in India, you know that that is not necessarily what it is that you're going to encounter on a regular basis. So that amplification of existing biases, existing stereotypes, is a limitation. Let's make sure that we're teaching students about that as well.
Great. Thank you both for your responses. And Claire, I'll pass it back on to you.
Great. So thank you for that really productive discussion. The main things we hope you'll take away from this conversation are that AI literacy prepares students for the future, and that AI coherence ensures that your implementation works in the systems we have today. And if you keep those two facts in mind, it's a little bit harder to go wrong. We also hope that this has raised a lot of good questions. When you're thinking about new projects like this, there may be less answers than there are questions at this time, and I think that's okay. So where do you start? If any of this has inspired you to think more about how AI can work in your organization, we recommend you start with stakeholder engagement. Students and teachers are really the people who know the most about this, and if you can work with them, develop small, testable pilots with clearly defined success metrics and a focus on alignment with existing goals, you'll be already half the way there. We urge you also to think about problems at both the individual, that is the student or the teacher level, and the system level. And to bear in mind that AI literacy and AI coherence are two sides of the same coin. They support and complement one another and work towards the goal of ethical, effective, and reflective use of AI. There are a couple of links to the things we talked about here today. This will be available once the slides are made available. And thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate this discussion, and here's some contact information in case you have any follow-up questions.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your interest in supporting our young people as they grow and develop.
Thank you so much.